Our moderator is Ben Hovaness. He is the Senior Vice President of Marketplace Intelligence at Omnicom Media Group. Hey, Ben, welcome.
Hey, how are you, Lisa? Thank you.
I'm good. And did I say your name correctly?
It's Hovaness, you were close.
Hovaness?
Is my video working? I'm actually not seeing my thumbnail here.
Oh, yeah, no, I can see you and hear you perfectly. And as I see, and your two other panelists, Rachel and Ryan, have come on as well. So I will leave you guys to it since you're all set, and enjoy.
Thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. I'm Ben Hovaness. I'm SVP of Marketplace Intelligence at Omnicom Media Group. It's great to be back at a conference in person. This is my first one since the pandemic started. So the title of today's panel is Solving for Identity. Now, the digital identity space is incredibly complex, and we only have 20 minutes. So I thought it might be helpful to start by summarizing the challenges that we find ourselves needing to address. Now, you might think that identity is a fresh issue in 2021, given the way that it's been covered in the trade press, not Media Post, of course. But the reality is that the cookie has been crumbling in the programmatic space for years. And with that terrible pun out of the way, let me explain what I mean. Cookies are the dominant identity currency in programmatic advertising. In most programmatic ad transactions, a user cookie signal gets attached to a bid request. And then DSPs look at that cookie signal to figure out a user's identity. It's the foundation of identity for targeted advertising. But 4 years ago, in 2017, Apple decided that this use of cookies exposed too much personal data and restricted the availability of cookies on its devices. And by the end of 2019, Apple had completely destroyed the viability of cookies as an identity signal in Safari. And that meant that in the US, where iOS enjoys about a 60% mobile market share, this was the equivalent of a Thanos snap. If any of you are fans of the Marvel movies, half of mobile web impressions lost identity and tracking. And then a couple months ago, Apple rolled out iOS 14.5, which did the same thing for in-app inventory. And that left Google, owner of Android and Chrome, as the cookie's primary defender. Of course, until Google announced that they were going to be retiring cookies in 2022, which recently was pushed back to 2023. Google has proposed a technology called Flocks as a replacement for cookies, but it won't be one-to-one based. The C in Flocks is for cohorts. In parallel, a variety of identity consortia like UID2 and OpenAP are trying to replace cookies with a new type of one-to-one signal. So where does all of this leave marketers? Are we on the cusp of a programmatic dark age, or is this just another step on the journey? And how are marketers adapting? To discuss all of this, we are joined this morning by two terrific panelists. Joining us from IHG Hotels and Resorts, we have Rachel Pierce, who is their Global Director of Programmatic Media. In her current role, Rachel leads a global data-driven media organization responsible for planning, data management, and media activation. Earlier in her career, Rachel held roles at Publicis, WPP, and Dentsu, but never Omnicom, so we missed out. And joining us from Catchco, we have Ryan Watson, who's their Chief Customer Officer and Chief Marketing Officer. He leads a variety of functions over there, including marketing, strategy and insights, brand and product, and customer support. Previously, Ryan has held marketing leadership roles at obscure firms like Kraft Heinz and Amazon. Thank you both for joining us. How are you doing?
Great, Ben, thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so with all of that preamble out of the way, let's get into it. So my first question is, in this world that I was describing, where there are fewer bid requests that have one-to-one signals because cookies have disappeared in a lot of contexts, thanks to ITP, has the value of first-party data in programmatic diminished? What have you been doing to adapt? And then the second part of the question is, what do you think about heading out to 2023 when cookies are going to be deprecated entirely? What's your thought on how to prepare for that? So Ryan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, happy to, Ben. And this is really complex stuff. Rachel, Ben, and I were joking that we could probably spend 2 hours talking about this. We have 20 minutes, so we'll try to be concise and save some time for questions. But stepping back, this is just a great opportunity for all of us to really just rethink our entire MarTech stack, how we're thinking about the value of first-party data, how we're going to market, and how we're engaging with consumers. So, my background, as Ben mentioned, came from big company world where we had very robust tech stacks. We had, wealth of first-party data. Oftentimes we're being disintermediated because, in the CPG space, as we know, a lot of those deterministic addressable signals sometimes are a little bit lacking. Now I'm in a venture-backed, smaller kind of direct-to-consumer world where historically we've had a wealth of first-party data we could leverage, but as Ben hinted at, the way the world's evolving, it is completely tearing up that playbook. So for us, Ben, to directly address your question, there is still value. I think anybody that says that value of first-party data over time is going to go away is definitely wrong. I think, is the value of that data going to decrease? Potentially. But most importantly, is the value of that data going to change? 100%. So how we're thinking about it is within the current construct of how we're marketing in the programmatic space, as an example, throughout the full funnel, really trying to understand what are the ways, where are the places where the efficacy of that data is decreasing, trying to pull back there. But most importantly, again, in the vein of what I mentioned before on opportunity for all of us to step back, what are some places where potentially we haven't leveraged first-party data as much as we should have? So I think a great example is like lookalike audiences and things like that. If big, Thanos snap kind of changes, as Ben mentioned, force us to all step back and think through not just the ways we're working today, but secondarily, what are new ways that we can all operate? I think that's a great opportunity for us. So definitely big impact on value of first-party data and how we're at least utilizing it today. I think on the bigger question, if we do get to that world of 2023, if in an Armageddon scenario where we do get to a full cookie deprecation state, and we're still in this world of identity atomization or balkanization or whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, I think that is a very, very bad place for us to get to. My personal feeling is that, I don't want to say it's a moot point or a moot question, but I do believe that there's so many vested interests, there's so many dollars at stake that between now and then, there will be a bunch of other solutions that we'll talk about later, whether it's the UIDs of the world, whether it's the flocks of the world. So I do think if we get to 2023 and things head down this path of that, really, really granular deterministic addressability in the identity space goes away because of cookie deprecation, and we haven't as an industry come up with some viable alternative, that'd be a very tough situation for all of us as marketers.
Thanks, that's great. And what about in your world, Rachel? It's a somewhat larger marketing organization. How has it been playing out at IHG?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. And the way we're approaching it is we're quite honestly just asking a lot more questions. We're asking a lot more questions, whether it's our strategic onboarding partners, what kind of non-cookie identifiers they're going to use, how we can apply that within our first party. And we're also asking a lot more questions to our third-party data partners and being more strategic and thoughtful about who we're going to work with. And, trying to understand more the source of that data. What is the source of that data? Is there an identifier that is non-cookie based? Are they preparing for the deprecation of the cookie? And how are they preparing for non-cookie environments like connected TV? So we think that by asking more questions, by understanding the data foundation more and how IDs are being identified and applied is just going to make us better data planners and strategic, and also hopefully find more of a safe haven for when we get to the other side, who will be able to partner with.
That's great, thank you. So I guess talking a little bit more about the future. So I mentioned in my preamble that the programmatic world seems to be dividing into a couple opposing camps. This is necessarily a simplification, but on the one hand, you've got Google, which has said publicly, repeatedly, that it's just abandoning the idea of one-to-one marketing outside of its owned and operated properties. Like they've just said straight up, yeah, great, you've got a CRM list, but you're not going to be able to use it out on the open web and DV360. It'll work in YouTube, but not so much elsewhere. And then on the other hand, you've got the new UID consortium led by the Trade Desk, and you've got some other one-to-one based ID standards, and they're making another bet, which is that the future of one-to-one isn't going to be cookies, but it's going to be authenticated login based user level signals. So, you're both at companies that have a lot of first-party data. Is that driving where you place your bets? Are you taking a wait and see approach? Are you kind of splitting the difference? I would love to hear more about that. And Rachel, do you want to go first this time?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, definitely wait and see. We think there's really smart people that are going to solve for this problem. And so all we can do is prepare our house and under things that we can control. So that is our first party data, continue to double down on our first party data, make sure it's consumer first, transparency and governance, and investing in MarTech that can support the use of it. But then on the other side of it, what's under our control, and the big variable is how we're going to look at performance on the other side. If view-through attribution isn't available to us anymore, how do we become less dependent on that and understand the value of our media? So, doing a lot of testing, whether it's cookie-based versus non-cookie-based, understanding the incrementality impact of our media. So on the other side, however it looks, we know how to invest our media regardless of how measurement will look like on the other side.
So just as a follow-up question, are you thinking about maybe shifting the balance between programmatic and other channels? Just because, as I was alluding to earlier with the YouTube example, the walled gardens are just going to be less affected by this, right? There aren't going to be changes to the ability to use CRM targeting on not just YouTube, but Facebook, for example. So are you thinking maybe there'll be a shift in your channel mix, or how are you thinking about that?
We're not talking about shifts in the channel mix. I think what we're trying to do is understand, where our media investment is going to create the consumer behavior that we want. And so if we can get better at understanding that, whether it's through the channel mix, then we can determine how to apply our media in the future. I mean, we know that within programmatic, where we believe, the more innovative ad units when the connected TV space and streaming audio just hit harder. And so we want to continue to be in places that are going to make an impact for us, and we'll drive that. So I don't know what that media mix will be, and we're not having decisions of shifting it based on data not being as plentiful.
Yeah, the CTV point's a great one. We could have a whole separate panel just about what's happening in the CTV space in programmatic and outside of it. So Ryan, what about Catchco's approach? Wait and see, placing bets, channel mix shift. What are you thinking as a marketing organization?
So all the above. I mean, we are firmly in team hedging camp right now. And some of this, I think, brings up a more macro point of, again, my background coming from large companies. We, in theory, would have had the resources if we had enough conviction about one path or the other to really double down and invest. And if we happen to be wrong on that view, we could then double back. It wouldn't be a one-way door, and we could then rebuild a new model. For smaller companies like us, that's just not a viable path. I mean, if we full on committed to one path and it turned out that that isn't the way the world played out, we would be in a very challenged position. So I'd say high level, I think none of us exactly know. None of us have that crystal ball that says where the world is going to head. So I'd say, are we committing to one or the other? No. I think my personal feeling is, as we get into talking, later in this session and the rest of the conference here about things like Flock and UID, I mean, I personally believe that some variant of one, both of those will exist. So I don't think we're going to get to a world where we're not going after cohort, segment, interest-based type audiences like a Flock type situation, or something that is more of a direct kind of cookie type replacement, a la UID. I don't know which one, what lead horse in each of those veins is going to pull out ahead, but I do firmly believe that something in both of those camps will exist. They'll be viable, and our job as marketers is going to be, how do we sort of weave those two things together? I think, Ben, to your other question, in parallel for us, and some of this has been driven, frankly, by CAC inflation. So like a lot of consumer companies, we have seen media costs rising, we have seen CACs going up. So a function of that has been for us an increased focus on broadening our media mix, increasing investments, Rachel, to your point, things like CTV, but also addressable out of home, podcasts, linear TV. So I mean, I think across the board, getting back to my earlier point, this is a great opportunity for us all to step back and think through how we're going to market, what that media mix looks like. And for us, Ben, to your question, we definitely are broadening that out.
That's great. Yeah, at Omnicom, we have a pretty omnivorous approach to signals, where it's like if a signal is out there, we'll take it in and test it. So we're certainly going to be doing Flock testing when it becomes available, and we're testing UID on an ongoing basis as it continues to scale up. I guess the difference is that with our position in the industry, we recently endorsed UID2 in order to drive adoption on the publisher side, right? So we're trying to assist the formation of the market, because if ad sellers don't think that there's going to be demand for UID2 backed impressions, it doesn't make sense for them to do the work to get the integration going. So we're trying to drive adoption there. But to your point, since UID2 is only a solution that works for authenticated situations, there's a lot of the internet where people just aren't going to log in. And so in cases like that, we're going to be reliant on flocks or whatever other successor technology there is. So we're trying to get the replacement one-to-one solutions to scale, but we recognize we'll never get to 100% coverage. All right, so last question, and this one is totally pie in the sky. Where do you think these identity challenges are going to leave the programmatic space? And specifically, are we going to end up with a new generation of interoperable identifiers to take over from cookies, at least in some portion of cases, right? As I was saying a minute ago, it's never going to be 100%. Or do we think this is just going to drive further consolidation of spend into walled gardens that aren't as affected by these technological changes?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in since I'm off mute here, Rachel. I mean, I think I always try to start with like, what are the things we know? And in my mind, I mean, we know that programmatic, writ large is not going away. So that ability to automate buying and selling, to more directly target people, that will be a core part of how all of our companies market going forward. So I think we know that in some form that's not going away. I also personally feel that this concept of walled gardens is also not going to go away. When you think about just the competitive dynamics, when you think about the big massive companies that are involved here and what their designs look like on the future of their industries, I don't see a world where, again, the concept of a walled garden changes. I think what they look like and how that walled garden comes into play is going to change. And so much of this, as we all know, is kind of reading tea leaves in Washington. And I'm certainly not an expert on that. And that's another reason why I'm trying to take more of a hedged approach. But I do think we will always have to deal with this concept of a walled garden. And going back to my point before, I do think that we're going to have this sort of triple-headed monster of a walled garden approach, some kind of a cookie replacement a la sort of UID2, and then something like a flock type solution. So the big thing that I've had my team starting to think through now is, regardless of what technology wins out, what industry consortium wins out, if we do feel like the future is going to be comprised of those three buckets, how should we start re-architecting our internal data infrastructure? How should we think through our MarTech stack? How should we think about our internal and external stakeholders and partners that we work with? Because this is fundamentally going to be a completely different world we live in. It's going to force all of us to rethink, again, internally and externally, what that looks like and how we go to market.
Yeah. Okay, I'll go off mute and take this first. I love prediction questions. I love listening to other people predict. I'm horrible at predicting anything, and I don't know if I'm just too logical and I can't see the foresight. But what I can tell you is I'm super glass half full and really optimistic, and I do believe that what it will look like on the other side is going to be better than it is today. And the cookie has been a wonderful piece of code for us. It's helped us grow our industry. It's helped us make cases for putting more money. It's given us a lot of data, but it's just so flawed. And I'm excited to see what this next world is going to look like, whether it's a consortium of walled gardens and new identifiers, because I believe, and I guess this is very Pollyanna of me, and but I believe on the other side, it's going to be better for the consumer. It's going to lead to more transparency in how our digital footprint is being used, and that there will be more value to the advertisers on the other side of something that may work more to our benefit. So I don't know what it's going to look like, but I am very excited and think it's going to look better than what we have right now with the cookie. It's flawed and it's not scalable.
Yeah, I love that last point about the better consumer experience. That's something that we talk about a lot as part of our endorsement of UID too. Like, it's not just a win for advertisers, it's better for consumers, actually, for there to be a unified cross-device picture of them, because it just reduces the amount of irritating over frequency and irrelevant ads that people are going to get served. Plus, it saves them the need to log in over and over and over again, as people often have to on iOS devices today. So I love that point. So
I'm just jumping in here.
Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, no, we have a question here, and you guys, first of all, great. I mean, it is a hard discussion, so you guys really are, gave a lot of great information, and we have a question for you from Tom Mitchell, and it's basically, okay, if more and more media is on mobile and CTV, where device IDs are persistent, and if most audience segments sent to a DSP are passed through an identity graph like LiveRamp, what percentage of your media buying is still cookie dependent?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it really reveals a sophisticated understanding of the ID space. The challenges, though, well, I'll give my perspective on it. First of all, device IDs on mobile and CTV are not necessarily persistent. The dominant signal on CTV is an IP address. IP addresses aren't static over time. They also don't map cleanly to one person. And if we talk about what's going on in mobile, Apple just killed off IDFA. So there's no longer a persistent in-app identity signal. So on Android, you still got a good one with AAID. But even there, like we just don't have the persistent ID signals that we used to. So going to the question about what percentage of our media buying is still cookie dependent, I mean, I can speak for Omnicom when I look at our programmatic data, it's a high percentage. It's over half of what we're doing through DSPs. So when cookie deprecation happens in 23, we're going to see a pretty significant effect. And we kind of got a preview of what that was going to look like when ITP hit a couple of years ago, because cookies were wiped out in iOS, and it reshaped the market in terms of the pricing differential between Android and iOS. So that's my 2 cents. Ryan, do you want to take a stab at it?
Yeah, I'm curious, Rachel, to get your perspective as well. I mean, I would echo what Ben said. I mean, I think because of all those challenges we've talked about, and I think the reason that this conversation is so interesting for all of us is that we are still very cookie dependent. I think it's very nice to talk about a lot of these other channels and platforms and technologies involved, but when you just boil it down to its simplest level of like all of our programmatic activities, how much it is dependent on cookies, it's, varies by company, but a significant majority in my experience. And again, I think that exciting future world that I agree with Rachel on, I think hopefully that starts to morph that a little bit, but I'd say today, yeah, it's significant majority, I think, would still be cookie dependent.
Yep. And I agree with both Ben and Ryan on that.
Rachel, I have to say, I love your glass half full attitude. That's the best attitude to have. Well, just in terms of, I'm wondering as far as how much of these changes are moving you towards more contextual advertising, so direct with publishers. Rachel, why don't do you have a thought for that?
Yeah, no, I love that, because I think, let's just say we come out of this world and there's just not a lot of data that we're working with anymore. And oh no, there's contextual. Oh no, there's something that's worked for decades and decades and decades in advertising that we can rely on once again. So, and I think we always have to some degree. That it's making a comeback, I think is interesting. But it's contextual advertising is there and always has been because it works. So that makes me feel good knowing that there's a lot of uncertainties coming out on the other side. And if our addressable data universe becomes smaller in nature, we have contextual to pick up the slack, and it's always worked.
Yeah, I very much agree. Not a ton to add on to that. I mean, I'd say in some ways, like big changes like this, I think make what's old new again. And I think, to Rachel's point, sometimes we do try to get ourselves all caught up in the latest and greatest evolutions. But, oftentimes there is always going to be that very important role to play for channels and platforms and targeting approaches that for some companies, they might have overlooked for a bit of time. And so I think in the social space, on the targeting side, I think also in the search space, is going to be a big one. I think that kind of behavioral, interest-based, activity-based targeting is going to be a big part of activities going forward.
Did you want to add anything, Ben?
No, I think that's great. I mean, the one thing I would add in is just that, Omnicom spent a lot of time and money building out a programmatic inventory graph over the past several years, because we always had this view that context was really important, and having a really detailed understanding of what the market looks like on a site and placement level basis would be really valuable to our clients. It's just, there's no getting around the frequency and accuracy of targeting problem. So contextual is great, but because that's the only way to reconstruct some of those frequency management, reach driving, et cetera, type of techniques that maximize ad effectiveness for our clients.
Okay, great. Well, and it's funny, it goes right back to Summit just before COVID. Contextual marketing and contextual advertising was a big part of that, and something that, so I think, as you guys are saying, it's that old new and keep bringing it back, but it'll always be a big part of what you guys are doing, and important as well as everything else. So, but thanks so much. This was a really great panel, you guys. Really appreciate it. A lot of tough sort of subject matter to get into and a lot of ifs, you know, but I think, you know, moving forward, it at least gives everyone something to think about. So Rachel, thank you. Ben, I appreciate you and, you know, monitoring it, the whole thing, and Ryan as well. So, and hopefully you'll enjoy the